Hi guys. So I finished Half Men recently, and it's a show that's lingered for quite a bit, and I want to talk a bit about some of the thoughts that came up for me as I watched the series and after I finished the series. It's not really about the show itself, but very briefly, I would say Half Men is a story about two male characters from when they're teenagers to when they're like in their early to mid 40s in Scotland, around growing up around the 80s, and the kind of like homophobic circumstance around the time and how that affected them. And it's a show about masculinity, it's a show about toxic masculinity, it's a show about not being able to accept your queer identity. One of the characters in the show is gay, and that actually is quite a central part of like how and why he struggles in the series. And I think the thing that I really enjoy about it is how the time and the place is so pertinent to the birth of the characters. Like these characters are real, like they feel real because who they are is very much shaped by the kind of societal attitude that there was during that time period. I mean, obviously, I don't personally know, like what it was like in Scotland at the time, but judging by how people have talked about it on interviews and on Tumblr from fans, including some people who live in the UK or if not even in Scotland, I think it does a very good slice of like capturing it does a good job in capturing that slice of time in and place in history then, and how that in turn then kind of forms who the characters are. And I think the thing that it's really brought up for me, and which were also, I guess, the thoughts that I was having for quite a bit, like, because it was a series released weekly for a while, and I caught it when episode 3 finished, so I watched 4, 5, and 6 as it came out. I had quite a bit of time to think about it, and I drew a few of my thoughts and contemplations in my daily sketchbook, which I'll put here. And I also wrote a bit about it in some of my morning pages, which is kind of like a journal, and in my word sketch as well, my daily word sketch, which is the writing equivalent of my daily sketchbook, which is for visuals. And I think the reason why I'm talking about it now is because it is just a bunch of very loose thoughts that haven't really left me. So I thought maybe if I just sat down and talked about it, talk through it, maybe some of these threads will come together a bit better. So of course the show itself talks about men. I think inherent in that cultural background is this undercurrent of heteronormativity, hetero relationships, a man and a woman, and what that means, and also therefore what the expected gender roles are when you are a man and when you're a woman. What is, in a way, the societally accepted way, or even societally, what is this, celebratory way congratulatory way, exemplary way of being a man or a woman. Of course, in Half Men, it talks more about the men. Another thing that it brought up a lot, is actually, especially reading people's thoughts on Tumblr, is the misogyny in it. And I think the thing that's interesting is I've known for a while that I have internalized misogyny, as much as I would like to pretend I don't. The fact of the matter is I do. And so watching this show has also kind of been a bit of an impetus for me to look at a bit more deeply at my internalized misogyny. In particular, what it means for me, a person who is born female, socialized female, raised female, and who now identifies as non-binary. But I think for the most part, too, people around me, they will still treat me as female slash female with an asterisk. And what I mean by that is I live in Singapore. I don't go around telling people that I'm non-binary. I mean, mostly because it'll take too much time to explain. And then to like request for people to kind of acknowledge what I am. I think a lot of this is this idea of like, it's just less trouble. It doesn't super bother me, which is not entirely true. It does bother me a bit, but it doesn't super bother me. Like, I think it's more trouble than it's worth to go around introducing myself, being like, "Hi, I'm non-binary," and so I don't, because it's more convenient to live that way. But also at the same time, I think a part of me, of course, still does want that external validation of being acknowledged, that I am non-binary, or that I'm not actually just a girl or a girl. Anyway, that is something that I think needs unpacking, and it's funny. I kind of want to laugh about it, but also, well, sometimes I think like I've already known that I'm non-binary for so long. It's strange that it still comes back around to kind of not haunt me, but like reveal that there's still parts of it that I haven't fully looked at, and that, you know, I still run on old programmings of heteronormativity and also misogyny. But the more key, I guess, thing that I want to talk about is the notions of what it means to be raised as a girl versus as a boy, being a tomboy, and also how gender role kind of plays out in terms of like what your life is supposed to look like in gendered terms, when you also discover that you are not straight, right? So in my case, attracted to both men and women. And in theory, I think possibly any gender, though that hasn't been put to practice or to test yet. And so what I mean by this is, like, I think there is this... Okay, let's start with Half Men, right? So in Half Men, it's clear that there is a script of like, this is what a man is expected to be like, or like what a successful example of a man is supposed to be like in society. And to some extent, that's Ruben in the show, this tall, big, burly man who is quite a bit of a protector. One of his good sides, I guess, is that he is a bit of a protector. Of course, there is the negative bits of it in which he is extremely physically violent. And I think the thing that is interesting about the characters in this show is that you can't divide the good parts from the bad parts, because I think they stem from the same core, the same inner core. And so the thing that makes him such a good protector of Niall, his stepbrother, or of Mona, his girlfriend slash wife, and as much as that protectiveness can become controlling, like they are all just varied manifestations of the same core of who he is or who he thinks a man should be. And his physical violence is part of his ability to protect. Like, one of the reasons why the relationship between the two brothers is so complicated is because Niall is a bit more of the person who is bullied, and by being associated with Ruben, he's able to gain protection. And so the thing that protects Niall when Ruben is there is Ruben's ability to enact extreme physical violence, or at the very least physical violence, maybe not extreme. But and so it's like that very cliche thing where your strength is your weakness. It's just that it shows up differently sometimes. And so I was wondering, what is the female equivalent of that? And what society believes a girl should be, in a way, is kind of like, of course this is a caricature of a girl, just as Halfman's just as like a man is also a caricature in that case. But the idea of what a girl should be like is kind of like feminine, pretty, possibly small-sized, long hair, skirt wearing, kind of I don't know how to pronounce this word, acquiescing, kind of like giving in, not quite submitting, but giving in, I guess, is kind of a good level of connotation of what I want to say. But and so like this notion of a girl and also notion of a woman is kind of like just a slightly more grown-up version of this, because unfortunately I think that youthfulness associated with girl is still very much a quality value in women in today's society. And so being somebody who's a tomboy, I feel like often this angle is not often captured in media and not well captured in media. And what I mean by this is around the time when I grew up, when I was a teenager, or when I was slightly younger than a teenager, which is like early 2000s, there were a lot of like tomboy transformation into a woman kind of media. And what I mean by that is like things that come to mind would be like Miss Congeniality. In manga, that would be the category called gender bender. So one of my favorite mangas at that time, although I don't really like the ending, Crimson Hero, or like anime like Ouran High School Host Club, Hanakimi. There's this, or even Mulan, I guess. There's this idea of like, or like Buttercups in Powerpuff Girls. So there's this idea of like a portrayal of a tomboy as a girl who is kind of boyish, but eventually will kind of settle into the role of what is expected of her as a woman and do it well. And therefore there is that appeal of like not one of those girls, which, you know, if you follow the trend of like pick me girls, like if you're aware of the trend of pick me girls and not one of those girls and all that stuff, you know you would know that that is a form of internalized misogyny. Even like song lyrics in Paramore's Misery Business, Avril Lavigne's Skater Boy, these are artists that I really like. Back then, I still like them. I just think that, now looking at these songs, a more critical lens is needed, like the awareness that it was misogynistic, and it still is, but also that these songwriters were young at that time. And like, I feel like that misogyny and that perpetuation of that particular brand of tomboy misogyny, a tomboy's internalized misogyny, is a product of that particular time. And the reason why I say it's a product of that particular time is because, like, nowadays, I think with social media and stuff, people are more aware of things like non-binary, and things like the word like tomboy is much less used. People would talk more about looking more like maybe a butch or a masked lesbian or a femme or things like that. There are other words that are used. The word tomboy has kind of faded into disuse. And so I think that's what it is. I don't really have a judgment about whether it's good or bad. But I think what happens as a result of this is something that watching, I think episode 5, when Now says something to his then female fiance Ava. She's aware that he slips around with men. And at that point, she doesn't know that he's only gay. And he himself doesn't know what he is. He just finds it very hard to accept that he's gay. So he kind of breaks down in front of her. She tells him it's the 21st century. Nobody really cares about, the fact that you are gay. I'm paraphrasing here. And he says he knows, but it doesn't change the fact that he's ashamed. And it, in fact, doesn't help that the world has changed and moved on, because now not only does he feel ashamed, he feels like he's bloody irrational. And like, that part of it stood out a lot to me, because I think on the surface, I think I would like to think, at least, or I try to behave as if it's true, that, knowing that I am non-binary is like enough to assuage my gender identity. It's like I found a goal, that's it, end of this ship. We can go head for land, things like that. But I think it's not really true, and I think that sentiment of like the world has kind of moved on, but I have not. There is quite a big part of that in how I feel in terms of that tomboy identity and the expectation also of that a tomboy would eventually become a proper woman, and that tomboyness is just a phase, versus the more new age thinking that in fact there is a sort of stereotype of non-binary people as a certain kind of androgyny. Like I mentioned in one video, could be a very genderless or gender neutral kind of androgyny, in which you imagine somebody in like maybe a shaggy haircut, t-shirt and jeans, or it could be a very genderful kind of presentation, in which it might be a masculine body with facial hair, bright eyeshadow, skirt, boots, something like that, or a femininely built body but with very masculine clothes on top of it, like maybe overalls, work boots, Carhartt jackets, and maybe a short haircut or even a buzz cut, something like that. And that need for like sort of this balance between masculine and feminine elements to sort of qualify as non-binary, stereotypically non-binary, is once again a stereotype. And if you're interested in that, I watched a video recently from Queer Collective that talked about this in more interesting terms than I could. If you are interested, you can check out that video instead. But I think what I want to talk about in terms of that is, like, as my hair has grown longer, because I kind of I don't feel like cutting it. I've been very lazy to cut it, to think of a hairstyle that I want, and so I've just kind of put it out of the way. It's kind of brought up feelings of like, oh no, I'm gonna be perceived as more of a woman than I feel like I am. And I think what that has brought to the forefront of my head is that I'm not as secure in this non-binary identity as I might have been a bit earlier. Or maybe I am, and that's why it can come up for me to tackle. But also, like, internalized misogyny, right? So back to the tomboy thing, I think together with that tomboy stereotype, there is that, like, typical what a boy should be and then what he should be as a man, what a girl should be and what a girl should be as a woman, and then what a tomboy should be, in which it kind of diverges into what a woman would be. And all of this comes from assumption of heterosexual relationship, and adopting that in and of itself and kind of playing into that and maybe playing is not the right word, because playing kind of implies that it's conscious, and kind of just carrying out the scripts of these roles subconsciously without really meaning to is I think misogynistic. Not the actual actions in themselves. I'm not saying like a man and a woman in a relationship is misogynistic, but I think it's whether that dynamic internally has been examined by yourself, whether it's conscious or not. It can potentially become quite misogynistic if it's like mostly unconscious. Then you play into conditionings that are misogynistic in nature. And so what I mean by that is, this might be easier to explain in kind of this idea of a story that I have. So all along, even before I watched Half Men, I've wanted to write a story of three friends from like around 15 to 16 to I don't know what age they are, but until when they're adults at least. There might be a time skip, whatever. I mean, it sounds a bit like what Half Men is doing, and I think that is why it brought this back out to mind. But even before I watched Half Men, I had this idea of three friends, a kind of like stereotypical boy, like one that would be admired by not just his peers but also other girls, a stereotypical-ish kind of girl who is like short, petite, and I think looks-wise kind of fit what people expect of a girl. And when I say all of this, I kind of imagine it in a Singapore context. So this girl would be a modern equivalent of an alien in a way. and then a third friend who is... So the third friend is non-binary, and I flip-flop quite a lot of times between whether this person would be born male or born female, because the dynamics shift based on their initial sexual, like what gender they are assigned at birth, and therefore what they're socialized as. But eventually they do become non-binary, which is what happens when they're adults, right? So has a bit to do with work as well, which I won't talk about in this video. It's not really about these characters. I mean, I'm not talking about the story in this video, but about the dynamics, right? And so the thing is, this non-binary character is attracted to both the other two friends, the guy and the girl. And I think the thing that I notice and how I've been thinking about this dynamics is I wanted to write about how... So when I conceptualize this non-binary character as another guy, like born as another guy, born as a guy, so there'll be like guy, girl, and then assigned male at birth, non-binary. When they/he admits to liking both of them separately on different occasions, the first guy might be like, hey, I've dated this girl before, it didn't work out with us, but we're still very good friends, and I really hope that, you know, you and her work out, because it's hetero, great. While not admitting that he himself is also attracted to this non-binary assigned male at birth friend. And the relationship between him and the girl, the non-binary person and the girl, would then be also tackling how she realizes that she also likes women, and how that plays into her history of dating lesbians, and how she enjoys the emotional intimacy but hates the drama, which is again a stereotype. And therefore she finds some solace in how he is, because he's socialized male, kind of behaves a bit more emotionally distant in a way that she felt would be good for her in that time, and things like that. And so, like, what I really wanted to examine is this tension of these three people who are in a love triangle in which they all like each other, but there's denial in some cases depending on whether it's same-gendered, and whether it's heterosexual. And of course, when this non-binary person is imagined as assigned female at birth, then that tension changes. And the thing that kind of stood out to me is I found it more difficult to envision that non-binary character as assigned female at birth than I did as assigned male at birth. And I think when it comes down to it, a lot of it is just like a fear of looking at my own fears and my own conditioning and my own hang-ups about what a girl should be, what a tomboy would eventually become, and things like that. And so I think even though I accepted that I'm non-binary, I don't go around telling people, which I think is fine, but also maybe something that I can look at. But I think I still have a fear that if I appear too feminine coded from the outside, that it would very largely invalidate how I feel internally as non-binary. And I'm a bit more on the side of like, I don't think it's bad to want external validation of your identity, although I think probably you shouldn't bank on that being all your or your validation. Like, it should be, you should validate yourself, but like I can't help but want some external validation as well, and I think that is valid. You know, like, I'm not gonna bash myself for wanting some external validation. But yeah, I don't know. I think when that non-binary character is assigned female at birth, there is a lot more of that tension between her, and the female character who is meant to be a bit more conventionally attractive or desirable. Because there would be more of that competition, that sense of competition of being like, basically like what a pygmy girl would do, trying to prove that they are different from other girls. And what that is trying to do is kind of increase their value to men. And I think that is something that is missing when that non-binary character is assigned male at birth. And so for later iterations of the story, most of the time that non-binary character has been female, but I have also been very stuck with it because I think it requires me to face a lot of this unpleasant and ugly thoughts that I, as somebody who was a tomboy, had. The kind of thoughts that I had about other women who are deemed by society to be more desirable to men. And whether they actively play into that or not is another point, I guess. But in terms of my own hang-ups or issues with that, it's still one that I'm trying to untangle. It's hard to look at, to even observe, because I think it's just ugly. Like, you don't really want to look at it. You don't want to see that, like, you, as in me, have such unsavory thoughts towards other people, to be not jealous of them in the way of like I want to be them, but also kind of that while having the knowledge that I will never be them, because for one, I'm too tall, but also for another, I can't act and pretend for shit, and like, it's not gonna work out for me to pretend to be what society expects of a woman, even if I, just internally affirm myself as non-binary but play into being what society expects of a woman. I don't think that will work out, even if that does end up getting me, I don't know, a guy or what, a relationship. Like, I'm not even sure I want that, let alone what I would be like if I got that. Like, I don't think I want any of these things. And so I think my jealousy or envy of this hypothetical girl who has it all is mostly theoretical, in the sense of I'm jealous of them because I can't have it, but I'm not jealous of them in a sense of I want to have it, because I won't be able to have it in the way that I want it as a non-binary person, if that makes sense. And I think that is what is difficult to admit, to look at. And so I think this video, messy as it is, has probably served that purpose in kind of putting this out. Because I think if you watch Half Men, a thing that is like, is it a spoiler to say it's a tragedy? I don't think it is, but it is a tragedy as a genre of story. A lot of things happen to make it so that the ending is a tragedy. But also all along the way, they just do things that are not great ideas, and it just piles up and up and up and up until the inevitable bad ending happens. And so I don't think there is any one thing in Half Men that is kind of like you can point to this thing and be like, you change this and they will be able to have a good ending, either now or Ruben. I don't think it's as simple as that, and I think for myself, I don't think it's as simple as that either. But I definitely feel like a very big part of what led to the many pieces of bad decision piling up is the fact that Now was unwilling to admit to himself that he is gay. And what I'm trying to do with this video is, well, I mean, I'm not currently having issues with my attraction orientation, and so the one that I am trying to put out there is more of the gender orientation of being non-binary, of having been a tomboy but also raised as a girl and with the expectations of what a girl should be, while knowing the advantages of having certain masculine characteristics would bring, while at the same time knowing that having other masculine characteristics would put me at a disadvantage, whether romantically or in the workplace, that it would be frowned upon, whereas if the same attributes are on a man, it would be celebrated. And that whole like jumble of when you're a tomboy, you're physically female, you're socialized female, but you try to bring in, or you try to express the bits of yourself that are deemed masculine by society, and sometimes you're rewarded for it and sometimes you're not. And whatever it is that you still have an expectation to kind of fall into the gender role of being a girl, being desirable to men, married to a man, eventually having kids, taking care of the household, things like that. Like, it sounds very outdated, and I admit that it is kind of outdated in the sense that a lot of people who do get married, and even who are heteronormative in today's society and get married, don't necessarily subscribe entirely to it. But if they don't examine it, a lot of people do end up playing into the scripts. And as somebody who has known for a long time that they are not fully a girl, and for years have taken on the term non-binary, like, it's weird to say I've admitted it and also have not dug that deeply into this portion of it. So yeah, I think that's what I needed to talk out loud this video. Right, let's see how long this was. Oof. Okay, that's 38 minutes. Alright, I'll see you next time. Bye.